Okay, so hi everyone. I'm really happy that you are all joining us today for this webinar on the crossover between celiac disease and diabetes. We have Sharon Weston here today, who's a senior clinical nutrition specialist and she works in both GI nutrition and endocrine divisions at Boston Children's Hospital. She received her undergraduate degree in biochemistry from Colgate University and then her master's degree in clinical nutrition from Boston University. She's a member of both the Boston Children's Hospital Celiac team and the diabetes team and is the lead dietitian for the Optimal Wellness for Life clinic. She really enjoys helping children and their families succeed in using nutrition to meet their specific health needs, so they can feel good and thrive, which I think is what we all want to do as dietitians. She enjoys practicing culinary medicine and is active with the Boston Children's Hospital Family Foods Connections Food Pantry, which runs monthly online gluten-free cooking classes. Sharon was the recipient of the SHAR USA 2021 grant, which was part of that food pantry project, and the NASPGHAN CPNP 2022 grant for a cooking-based intervention for food insecure families with celiac disease to improve access to food, quality of life, and gluten-free dietary adherence. So we are very lucky to have Sharon here today, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Megan. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, so we're going to be talking about celiac disease and type 1 diabetes and nutritional considerations. These are my disclosures. And just to talk about the objectives of today's presentation, we're going to review prevalence of type 1 diabetes and celiac disease, talk about screening labs and diagnosis, describe how gluten-free foods can impact glycemic control differently than gluten-containing foods, and review glycemic index of foods and strategies to optimize glycemic control on a gluten-free diet, discuss tips for meal and snack planning for busy families, review tips for school, and also different types of education plans. And then I will go over a case study. So there's a well-established link between type 1 diabetes and celiac disease, and it was first discovered over 60 years ago. And there's a range in reported prevalence of the crossover between celiac disease in patients with type 1 diabetes. The rates range from 2.4 to 16.4%, but the estimated prevalence of biopsy-confirmed celiac disease is about 6%. There are also reports that estimate that in adults, the prevalence goes up to about 10%. And typically, celiac disease is diagnosed within the first 5 years after the initial type 1 diagnosis is made. Classic intestinal symptoms of celiac disease may not be present in type 1 diabetes, and this really leads to advocating for screening this higher risk group of patients because it's not always very obvious. Serologic screening is done at or near the time of the type 1 diabetes diagnosis, and then about every 2 to 5 years, depending on the age, depending on the symptoms, and also really depending on the clinic or wherever the patient is going for medical follow-ups. About 2/3 of patients with the dual diagnosis are asymptomatic or present with minimal symptoms, and that is really why screening is quite important. So we know that patients with the dual diagnosis have increased complications with both micro and macro vascular complications. And there's some evidence actually that shows that following a gluten-free diet may prevent micro and macrovascular complications of type 1. So very important to really think about this dual diagnosis and screening and finding those patients. When we talk about lab monitoring, routine labs are typically monitored for patients that present with celiac disease and type 1 diabetes. And typically, we're following that tissue transglutaminase IgA level. Typically also in the diabetes clinic, we're going to be following hemoglobin A1C levels, usually checked every 3 months. And less than 7% now is the ideal level to try to achieve. But more often now, we're looking at continuous glucose monitoring information, and that time in range is very important. We're really trying to optimize the percent time in range so that we're shooting as high as 80% time in range, which is really ideal. So as you can see from the sample CGM data or continuous glucose monitoring data, gluten-free foods can impact blood glucose levels in quite unexpected ways. And you can see here that we've got a spike after breakfast, we've got a spike after lunch with most likely an overcorrection that led to a low prior to dinner. Then we've got another spike after dinner and another most likely overcorrection, which led to another low right before midnight. So really not ideal. And as you can see, when you look at a diet recall of what went along with that CGM data from this 4-year-old that I follow, who was newly diagnosed with celiac disease after having been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 2 months earlier, you can see that looking at the macronutrient intake can really also be an important thing to look at when we're looking at that CGM data. So I really like to analyze the diet recalls. I'm using a platform called Chronometer. And so it's nice because you can look meal and snack separately and analyze the macronutrients. And you can see here that this child had a relatively high carbohydrate intake at breakfast, 66%, and as well at dinner time, 73%. So just, we'll keep that in the back of the mind because we're going to be going back to this case at the end of my talk. But this is just a good segue into introducing the concept of glycemic index in the context of eating gluten-free foods. I love to use this slide with my patients, and this is really just talking about food as fuel and the different types of food fuel circles and how they impact blood glucose levels over time. And they not only affect blood glucose levels, but they also affect our hunger and our energy levels and our moodiness. And so when you look at this first food circle of food fuel, we've got high glycemic carbohydrates that result in a rapid rise and fall in blood sugar with also a high peak. And that high peak is going to affect higher A1C levels as well, right? So when you look at the second food circle of food fuel, we've replaced those high glycemic carbohydrates with more moderate glycemic carbohydrates that have more fiber, less sugar. We're eating our fruit instead of drinking juice. And that's going to result in a slower rise and a slower fall in blood sugar, but we're still going to have this kind of roller coaster effect. When we bring in protein and fat, that's really a game changer because when we're balancing lower glycemic carbohydrates with a protein or a fat, we're going to have a much more moderate rise and fall in blood sugar levels, a lower peak, and that's really ideal for optimizing glycemic control and improving A1C levels. So gluten-free products can really contain a lot of different types of gluten-free starches, and that can impact blood glucose levels in different ways. And this study that was done in 2021 was a review report that looked at 18 different studies evaluating gluten-free breads and the different ingredients in them. And I think there was a total of 132 breads that were reviewed. The results showed that about 60% of the samples presented with high glycemic indexes and only 18% were classified as a low glycemic index bread. And you can see on the left here that we've got our lower to moderate glycemic index grains, such as almond flour, flaxseed flour, soy, teff, quinoa. On the right, we've got our higher glycemic index grains like white rice flour, sorghum, corn, buckwheat. And so it's great to look at the ingredients when you're analyzing your ingredient panel and trying to figure out trends with blood sugar and noticing, wow, my blood sugar goes really high when I eat this certain food, and then looking at the ingredients and trying to come up with trends. It's also helpful to understand these different flours and how they impact blood glucose levels, even when you're making your own baked products, because if you're using more things that are lower to moderate glycemic index, like almond flour, that's just going to improve glycemic control. The study also looked at different ingredients that were added into these bread products and found that different ingredients can also impact blood glucose levels differently. And what they found was that the products that had the lower glycemic indexes had things like added fiber, yogurt, cottage cheese or curd cheese, sourdough, psyllium fiber, hydrocolloids, enzymes, fructans, and even resistant starch. So again, looking at the ingredients on different products and noticing these different gums and fibers and proteins can also be something that can give you a little help in following blood glucose trends. This chart is also very helpful in educating our patients on just kind of understanding the different range of carbohydrates and where they fall regarding glycemic index or glycemic load, really. And so when we think about our carbohydrates, we get our carbohydrates from vegetables and fruits and legumes and grains and snacks, sweets, and beverages, right? So under the low glycemic carbohydrate category, we've got our vegetables that are non-starchy vegetables, things like green beans and broccoli and carrots and salad, and then fruits like apples and oranges and berries, and then legumes, any kind of legume, garbanzo beans, lentils. The only legume that is really going to fall into a different category would be our baked beans, which have sugar in that sauce, which would be high glycemic. Under moderate glycemic carbohydrates, we're going to have things like our starchy vegetables like sweet potatoes or butternut squash, tropical or processed fruits like bananas and pineapples or raisins, less processed grains like quinoa or brown rice, and also lower sugar cereals that have 6 or less grams of sugar per serving and about 3 or more grams of fiber per serving. Under the high glycemic category, we're going to think about things like white potatoes, mashed potatoes, juice, canned fruit and syrup, refined grains like white rice, sugary cereals, chips, cookies, and soda and sugar sweetened beverages. We also don't want to forget about our proteins and our fats. And so thinking first of what proteins are high glycemic proteins are things that are going to be sugar sweetened. So things like chocolate milk or sugary yogurts with more than 8 grams of sugar per serving, or highly processed things that are breaded, so like gluten-free chicken nuggets. When we think about our protein foods, we also want to think about that plant-forward Mediterranean style approach. So encouraging more things from fish and plant-based proteins, chicken, less highly processed proteins like salami or sausage or bacon. And then fats also, we want to kind of encourage healthy fats that are more plant-based, nuts, seeds, nut butters, olive oil, olives, avocado, hummus. And then our saturated fats would be our lower on the list kind of fats. So things like sour cream or cream cheese or butter or margarine. So in general, a low glycemic gluten-free diet is going to emphasize minimally processed foods, lean proteins, dairy, nuts and seeds, legumes, non-starchy vegetables, low glycemic fruits, and whole grains, especially in their unrefined form, so that we just focus on those more moderate sources in terms of glycemic index or load. And the main messages that we really try to encourage are eating balanced meals, choosing snacks that I like to call paired snacks, which I'll go over that, but paired snacks are important, choosing a variety of foods, being aware that protein and fat are not freebies. They are going to impact blood glucose levels, but just in different ways than carbohydrates are. And also just different varieties of gluten-free grains will be impacting blood glucose levels differently. And then again, those fiber additives and gums are also going to play a part in impacting blood glucose levels differently. The gluten-free balanced plate model is a really easy way to visually help our clients with meal planning. And so just kind of thinking about step-by-step process in terms of making the balanced plate. So step 1, pick your fruit or vegetable. Step 2, pick your carbohydrates. Step 3, pick your protein. Step 4, pick your fat. And that just keeps it very simple. And planning meals and snacks does not need to be a complicated, fancy effort. Paired snacks, very important, especially when we're talking about the dual diagnosis, because this is really going to provide a nice, even fuel to our bodies, a more gradual rise and fall of blood sugar. And I always try to encourage eating mindfully, especially for snacks, so that we just, sit down, slow down, turn off screens, savor every bite, and smile in between bites so that snacks are enjoyed nice and mindfully. This chart kind of helps us to figure out how to make paired snacks by choosing something from the first column and something from the second column. And ideally, we're choosing a low or a moderate glycemic carbohydrate from the first column, along with a protein or a fat from the second column. So a cup of grapes and a piece of string cheese, or it could be a serving of gluten-free pretzels and 24 almonds. But those are just nice ways to easy make paired snacks. And just encouraging lots of different non-starchy vegetables and different colored fruits and legumes and different types of protein sources are easy ways to have our patients come up as well as healthy fats are easy ways to just make our easy paired snack ideas. These are just some examples here again of some gluten-free paired snacks. We also want to think about strategies for insulin coverage. So when we think about a high glycemic diet, especially, insulin delivery is very important because especially if you're using a pump, you need to deliver that insulin early, 15 to 20 minutes or even more before you're eating. And that's really not easy to do when, especially you're a child or even, anybody, you want to eat when you want to eat and, you don't really think about giving your insulin early, but pre-bolusing the insulin is really going to help a lot with glycemic control. And so that's one strategy that working with families is important to get across. So it might be that, breakfast especially, you notice that there's a very high rise in blood sugar. There's a lot of times big challenges in the morning with glycemic control. And so maybe, setting your timer so that when you get out of bed and you start brushing your teeth, you bolus your insulin. Just different strategies like that can help get that insulin on board early. Making a plan to go to the school nurse's office and get that insulin and then go back to the cafeteria, and that gap in time can be also a way to just have that early administration. The other thing is to think about modifying the mode of insulin delivery. So if you're not in a closed loop system right now, with which some of the newer insulin pumps are doing, and you're still doing this manually, providing your insulin as an extended wave or a dual wave, or even using a temporary bolus adjustment can help to modify the insulin so that you're not giving it all up front and you're spreading it out to accommodate the rises that may happen from extra protein or extra fat, or even like some of the impact of those gums that may be in some of the foods may have. So that's also helpful. And again, it's very important to work with your endocrine team to just work on modifying those insulin delivery options to come up with the best plan, because it's really individualized most of the time. We also want to think about just tips for success for busy schedules. So, planning ahead is just a key element to success, and it minimizes frustration. It prevents having to go through a drive-through and take risks. And so it's just a really important thing to just kind of work on planning skills for meals and snacks. Also, families are going to have different setups. There might not be everybody following a gluten-free diet or need to follow a gluten-free diet. And so choosing to either go 100% gluten-free for everybody or doing a combination is something that is up to the family. We always do want to make sure that the gluten-free recipes are cooked first, and then the non-gluten-free recipes are cooked second, just to minimize that cross-contact or cross-contamination that potentially could happen. Again, we want to make sure that we're really taking advantage of naturally gluten-free foods. Those are going to be not only easy to grab, but also usually lower in glycemic index. I also encourage batch cooking, and batch cooking is just a simple way to make a double batch instead of a single batch, and then freeze half of what you make so that you have now different containers in your freezer, and very easy to just grab something out of the freezer on a busy night. So just keeping things simple is just a real easy way to encourage families to reduce stress. And again, just meal planning tips at home We want to really try to minimize cross-contamination. We know that 10 to 50 milligrams of gluten can equal risk, and that would equate to 1/70th to 1/350th piece from a slice of bread. And so really want to try to make sure that we're preparing the gluten-free recipes first. We also want to try to just pay attention to those ingredients that we're using. So paying attention to sweeteners, different types of flours, different types of added protein, extra protein additions from extra eggs, or ultra pasteurized milk or processed milk that has, sorry, I should say ultra filtered milk that has a higher protein content, can really help boost the protein in recipes. Adding extra plant-based fat can also just lower that glycemic index. And just, paying attention to those different little things can help. So this chart just kind of puts together some simple recipe ideas for simple dinners. And again, it's just like following those step-by-step ideas. So starting with a fruit or a vegetable, it might be something like broccoli or salad or peppers, onions, and tomatoes. Then picking your protein, it could be things like roasted chicken or added Parmesan cheese, tuna fish, or eggs. Pick your gluten-free carbohydrate, which could be gluten-free pasta, roasted sweet potatoes, or regular potatoes. And then pick your fat, like olive oil or salad dressing, mayonnaise, butter, are all going to make things very simple and create balanced meals. We also want to think about tips for planning meals for school. So again, sticking to that balanced plate concept where we're choosing our fruits and vegetables and our protein and carbs that are gluten-free and healthy fats. And really, a lot of times the container can make things so much simpler when you're packing your lunches. So these bento style boxes where you can use separate areas and keep things from getting soggy. Toasting your gluten-free bread in advance before assembling sandwiches, making like a deconstructed sandwich type of lunch where you've got your crackers or gluten-free pretzels on one side and your protein and fruits or vegetables on the other, so that it's like a gluten-free Lunchable. Gluten-free leftovers like pasta or other things in a thermos. And finally, really taking advantage of school lunch options, because schools should be able to provide gluten-free options for our patients that are also appropriate for our type 1 diabetes patients. And so it is really important to work with food service and the school nurse to come up with some good options that the school can provide. And that can also take a lot of stress off families, and it can make the child really feel, just like anyone else, like they're eating school lunch. So that's a very important factor. So when we talk about school tips, working with the school nurse and food service director to come up with gluten-free options is very important. And this example here just shows where education was really needed. So this is actually a picture from one of my patients that the mom sent me this after her daughter had gone on a field trip, and her lunch included a gluten-free bagel, gluten-free pretty sugary cereal, dried cranberry raisins, juice box, and water. And so that's just all carbs, hardly any protein. And you can see from the CGM that she had like upward arrows going and then needed a big correction. So that's something that really didn't need to happen. And so again, working with schools is really important. So some practical ways to just think about accommodations for a gluten-free diet at school that are also going to be helpful for our type 1 diabetes patients are to first off, think about just naturally gluten-free ingredients in meals, including fresh fruits and vegetables and lean proteins, thinking about having gluten-free bread options for sandwiches, thinking about gluten-free buns for hamburgers or hot dogs, adding cornstarch for the fried foods, making sure that there's a dedicated fryer for fried foods, using corn tortillas for Taco Tuesday, making sure that the pizza vendor has gluten-free pizza options, using gluten-free soy sauce in marinades and sauces, using veggie chips or potato chips or corn chips, squeeze bottles, and using a food service supplier that offers many different gluten-free options, or just some practical strategies for food service. We also want to talk a little about a 504 plan, and a 504 plan is an important thing that will keep cross contact from happening, especially for younger children. It's going to provide access to safe alternatives that other student peers are going to have access to. And then it's also going to prevent students from being penalized when they have to miss school if there's any type of GI symptoms or anything related to their type 1 diabetes as well. And it thinking about just things like field trips and extracurricular activities, special events, the 504 is very important. When you look at the different types of learning plans in learning environments, there's 504s, there's IEPs, and there's individual healthcare plans. So let's just kind of talk a little about each one. The 504 is, first off, a legally binding plan. It's a plan between the parent and the school, and it's going to address accommodations in academic, extracurricular activities, and it stays in place through college. The IEP, on the other hand, the individualized education plan, is used when there are disabilities that affect a child's academic performance. So things like a speech delay or dyslexia or autism, and those are a little different. And then the individualized healthcare plan is designed to be used by the school nurse or by the health aide, and it deals with medical issues in the school setting, but it's not a legally binding document. So the 504 is really that important piece where it's legally binding. And sometimes it has to be there in place, because some schools really do a lot of pushback in terms of just saying that they're not going to provide things for lunch or for meals. And we have to really get more involved at a higher level to make sure that our patients receive what they're really supposed to be able to receive. So the right type of plan for celiac and type 1 diabetes, when you think about the health plan that outlines blood glucose monitoring, insulin administration, and medical support, the 504 plan outlines accommodations for the child. So when you put them together, that really could be like the ideal situation for our dual diagnosis patients. And at Boston Children's, we've put together a joint 504 plan document that it can be easily copied for anyone else that wants to use this. And this really is going to provide accommodations across all school activities. It outlines the health plan details. It includes an emergency plan too. And it also just works with trained diabetes personnel. So, so very helpful to have a 504 that's really designed for both celiac disease and type 1 diabetes. We also just want to talk a little about the dietitian and the role that the dietitian plays for our patients with the dual diagnosis. So, so this is really part of the bridge between endocrine and gastroenterology. So, so that dietitian is really linking both of those programs. And the dietitian provides nutrition education regarding the gluten-free diet, but also in the context of glycemic control. So, so from the GI side, we instruct on food label reading and hidden sources of gluten, and we assess growth and micronutrient intakes and making sure that nutrients are being met so that the diet is nutritionally adequate. And then from the endocrine side, we're really assessing those macronutrient intake trends and glycemic trends that happen at meal and snack times, and really relating blood glucose trends to diet and insulin dosing regimens. So we are really the link between the two programs, and very important. Also, I want to talk about just community-based support for our patients that have the dual diagnosis, and having community-based support can be really helpful. At Boston Children's, we've got the Celiac Kids Connection, which is our our celiac support group, and they've created what's called a diabetes liaison. And that person really helps to provide support to newly diagnosed families who are dealing with this complicated dual diagnosis. It can be very overwhelming, especially in young children, but even in teenagers as well. And so the liaison really connects people who have hands-on experience already living with the dual diagnosis with these newly diagnosed families. It's really helpful because it provides peer support, not only to the kids, but also to the parents. The kids really feel like they are not alone. And it also helps us to advocate for just different special needs that we might not even be thinking about. So, for example, at Halloween time, the liaison recommended that we really needed a candy list on the celiac support group that also met the needs of our type 1 diabetes patients. And so we combined the JDRF candy list that had the carbohydrate counts along with the celiac approved candies for that time. And so just the ones that have the celiac support group stamped next to them on this list are gluten-free options, and also list the carbohydrate amounts. And that's just really helpful. Also things like all of our different community events, just having different resources has already been improved by just having this diabetes liaison bring more of those needs to a focus. All right, so I'm just going to go into the case study again. So again, this is a 4-year-old female who initially presented to nutrition, diagnosed with type 1 diabetes 2 months earlier. And she had biopsy confirmed celiac disease, and now is on a gluten-free diet for a week. And you can see again from her CGM data that she's got big rises in her blood sugar after breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as having challenges with lows after those meals. And so looking at her initial diet recall in detail, for breakfast, she was having a gluten-free blueberry waffle with some chocolate milk and apple and pear cereal bar. And that breakfast was, again, relatively high in carbohydrates. And then when you look at the protein content in that breakfast, 8% compared to 66% carbs. So that's something to pay attention to. Morning snack was a little more balanced with 56% carbs and 18% protein, having some skim milk and a gluten-free brownie bar. And then for lunch, she was having peanut butter on gluten-free bread with a banana, some potato chips, and some cookies. And again, that was, a little higher glycemic index food choices. And then again, at dinner time, she was having white rice, chicken nuggets, ketchup, and mango ice cream. So that again was a relatively lower protein versus higher carbohydrate percent breakdown. When I look at the breakdowns for macros with my type 1 patients, I try to shoot for carbs more in the 40%. 40 to 45% is really something that works great. And so just balancing protein, adding in extra fat can really help modify things. All right, so after 1 month follow-up, we had this intervention where we modified the meals and snacks just slightly because I really don't want to change her eating patterns and pull away things that she likes to eat. But we just modified things a little, especially at breakfast and dinner. So we changed her waffle to a gluten-free, higher protein waffle recipe, and then used ultra-filtered milk that was higher in protein, kept her cereal bar, and that adjusted her protein intake up a little. So it was more, 18%, instead of, in parentheses, I have the previous nutrient analysis at 8%. So that helped. And then we also adjusted her dinner so that we brought up the protein and brought down the carbohydrate by adding in quinoa instead of white rice, used lower sugar ketchup, and again, added that ultra filtered milk so that she had a little more protein. She still kept her mango ice cream. And so you can see that that was 58% carbs instead of 73%, 19% protein instead of 10%. And so when you looked at her follow-up CGM data, this was at a 1-month follow-up, significant changes in her blood glucose control. So, and that really just made her feel so much better. There weren't these rebound lows that were happening from overcorrecting. She did have a big challenge still at breakfast, and the family was working very diligently to try to get that insulin on board 20 minutes before. And sometimes you can see, sometimes she would have a little low right before she would start eating her breakfast. And so again, we did this strategy where she would just eat a small amount of peanut butter when they dosed her insulin 20 minutes in advance. And that really seemed to help a lot in terms of preventing those lows that were happening right before she would start her breakfast meal. But overall, significant improvements in just adjusting those macros, and timing of insulin was also, an important thing. All right, so I'm going to just share my resources here. And then I think I'm going to open it up to questions.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. We have a bunch in here. So everyone just keep putting in your questions. Maybe someone else's question will inspire one for you. So we'll try to get to all of them. All right, so someone wants you to remind about the nutrient analysis software that you use. And also, Sharon, could you explain why that one's useful for you? Because I get this question a lot.
Yeah, so we use Chronometer or Chronometer. It depends on where you live, how you say it, but it's a Canadian-based program. It's free to all of our clients, and it's Chronometer, Chronometer. You can use it on your phone. It's you can also use it on the computer. I find it's really easy to use on the computer. We have a pro account, and the way that, so that does cost money, but the way that we save money at Boston Children's is we just have a pro account, and then we just categorize generic clients. So we have like female age 9 through 13, male age 4 through 6. And then we just put all of our patients in there with generic and just an initial or something. So if you want to pay more, you can actually, you have to pay by the client, and it gets a little expensive, but you can share information back and forth with your patients if you have that ability.
Yeah.
But I love to use it for type 1 diabetes. It's really helpful. And it's easy to analyze recipes as well for our type 1 patients. So you can customize recipes and then give them a food label of their recipe with the carb count in there. And it's really helpful.
Yeah, I think maybe for some of the private practice dietitians, sometimes you can have the client, purchase it. So that's good. All right. Actually, on that note, does Sharon have any recipes that are low in carbs and gluten-free for breads and desserts that you could share?
Oh gosh, I'd have to look them up, but I'm sure I do. I have hundreds of recipes.
Yeah.
I
So
like
on
to
that,
use things that,
on that note, maybe we can just pick a couple and just share them out to people who attended.
Yeah, I can certainly send some out. So in general, they're the recipes that I like to use have almond flour, so that they're just going to have more protein and fat for the type 1 patients. That works pretty well.
Yeah, that's a good tip. Someone's asking if you can clarify about sourdough bread and products for celiac. I'm guessing that's, I don't know what slide that was on, but which products?
That was on the study that reviewed all of those breads. And so sourdough is just one method, but you have to use gluten-free flour. So so there's some thoughts that you can eat sourdough bread, and you're able to eat that without symptoms, but not with celiac disease. So if you're, so sourdough is just one of those ingredients that seemed to help with glycemic control a little.
Great. Any thoughts on the view that the glycemic index is not reliable or unnecessary for patients to get hung up on? How do you communicate that?
Yeah, I mean, I really try not to have my patients look at glycemic index numbers. That's crazy. I think that we also always want to think about the real parameter we're looking at is not glycemic index, it's really glycemic load. So, when you think about glycemic index of carrots and pasta, regular pasta, they're going to have a similar glycemic index, but their glycemic load is going to be very different because of the carbohydrate amount in a serving. So I really try to just I like to use that gradient chart that I shared just so that people understand the little differences, but it's still okay to eat those high glycemic carbs. It's just, you have to just pay attention to your insulin and understand that that's going to affect your blood sugar in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a very celiac specific question. What are your thoughts on the hosts that churches use that are lower gluten for churches if they're having them once a week during Mass? What do you guys recommend?
There is a gluten-free or relatively almost gluten-free host. And I think that what we just came up with this question not too long ago. I think that we've really decided that it is okay because the amount of gluten in it is so negligible. It's definitely less than 20 parts per million. And again, when you think about the 10 to 50 milligrams of gluten that you need to cause risk, you're really not getting it from the single host.
Yeah. I think those lower gluten hosts have gotten a little bit more standardized. So, if I think that's a good option now. All right.
One more thing on that though. We did also talk about the wine part of it.
Oh,
and
a
how,
good point.
So really just if people are dunking their bread in the wine, because not every church uses host. So, churches are going to use gluten-free bread, regular bread, but if you're dunking the bread, you really need to pay attention to making sure that the wine is also not contaminated.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, I think we forget that one. All right. Do you use 40 to 45% for all diabetics or just those with the dual diagnosis?
I actually pretty much use it for all my diabetic patients. And it's a good goal. It's not everybody can do it. But it definitely helps with glycemic control. And it also really helps bring in vegetables and bring in protein and just, stay a little more away from those highly processed carbs.
Yeah. Okay. Someone's asking if you can explain what ultra filtered milk is. If they see it in the grocery store and that it's higher in protein and less in carbs, but what's the processing? Do you know anything about that?
That is a food science question. I think that I'm not exactly sure. It has something to do with the filtering process so that the protein content is higher and they remove the lactose.
Yeah, I think I can speak a little bit about, because for bread, this is sometimes relevant when you're talking about gluten-free wheat starch. So gluten's a protein, and so you can actually separate it from the starch component, which I guess would be the carbohydrate component, like the lactose. You can separate them through food science techniques that I do not know, but I know that's possible. So I'm assuming it's something like that with the filtering process.
And those milks in general, the stamped date on them are going to be much further out as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So also someone's asking about the resources and if you could share those again, but I'm going to say we'll just send out the resources list. I can copy paste the resources list. So in the follow-up email that you get from me tomorrow with your certificate, I will also send the resources list. How are the changes made into the diet focused on regulating carbohydrate? Oh, sorry, the sentence is a little bit, I think there's a word missing, but I think it's basically asking how these changes affect the cholesterol panels.
How the
changes on the diet changing the carbohydrate content. Do you see any impact on cholesterol?
You mean lipid profiles in patients?
Yeah.
I think it's individual, really. When you think about it, if you're going to have a high sugar diet in general, that's going to relate to a high triglyceride level, right? And that may relate then to higher lipid levels, higher cholesterol levels. But it is all, again, individual, I think,
Okay. Someone's saying the case scenario is interesting and helpful, but do you teach clients about calculating macros going forward? Is there an exchange recommendation you give or to help them guide them on how to create other meals? They're saying in their experience, it's hard because patients don't want to stick to the same foods all the time.
Totally. And I don't want patients to overthink things and cause other like disordered eating patterns from just overthinking things too much. So I really like that gluten-free plate model that I shared. That's from the Harvard School of Public Health. And just going through those steps. And if you're going to create a meal that is half fruits and vegetables that are lower glycemic, and you balance it with protein and carbohydrates and a healthy fat, in general, it's going to fit into that macro goal. I really just do the macro analysis when I meet with my patients every, few months, and we go through things just to match it up with their CGM data, because when you do that, you can actually help them understand, wow, that is why my blood sugar is going so high at, this time when I eat that kind of stuff, right? But I really don't encourage my patients analyzing macros.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is a question for both of us. So on the market, we see a lot of gluten-free breads that are rich in white flour, sorghum, and other high GI items, but we don't often see low GI index items. Do you have any info or suggestions for navigating that? And then the second part was wondering if Shar's research focuses on this area when designing food products. So I can answer the Shar part. One of the reasons that I work on product is that I really push the team to get as much protein and fiber into the products as possible. So that's really to help with this exact issue. I know it's not perfect, but we have standards for protein and fiber that are I think pretty good. I mean, compared to market, I think we do a good job in that space. So I don't know, Sharon, if you have like a guideline that you give people for like ratios of things, but
not really. I mean, I think that I use it more as, if they notice that when they eat this certain product and they always have like a really high blood sugar afterwards, then looking at the ingredients and just kind of making a little trend note, can help them understand what their body is reacting, because not everybody reacts the same way either. The other thing that I just encourage is that, if you're going to have something that makes your blood sugar go up high, then balance it with a little more protein, or get your insulin delivered earlier.
Yeah.
Oh,
hi, Kara. Any suggestions or tips or accommodations you recommend for transitioning to college, or any breakfast cereals that you recommend that won't spike the blood glucose too much? So 2 questions.
Okay, so college, we actually have a college session that we're starting. We're going to be doing this twice a year. And so really just, I think it's important when you're looking at colleges to look at what the options are for food service and dining halls. And it can be really challenging. It was really challenging during the pandemic because a lot of food service providers for colleges didn't have access to the normal products that they typically had, and it caused a lot of problems. But so just doing your homework and asking a lot of questions, also with like accommodations at college, so that you can meet with like the special ed department. It's really not special ed, it's more accommodations in college, just to make sure that you're getting the things that you need in advance. And then what was the second question?
The breakfast cereals, any favorites that won't spike too much?
I know. I'm a big fan of just using like steel cut gluten-free oatmeal. I think that and old-fashioned gluten-free oats are a good thing. I love to do like breakfast parfaits with Greek yogurt, some fruit, and just throw in some non-cooked like old-fashioned gluten-free oats, and that makes such a good balance.
Yeah, I know it's tough with the cereals. There's
there's a really good, I can't really say product names, but there are a couple of grain-free granolas that are really good also.
Yeah, Okay. Yeah. Grain-free. I think, yeah, that's a good tip though, looking for grain-free items for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Someone's saying, did you say 10 to 15 milligrams or 10 to 50 milligrams? I'm guessing that's in reference to the gluten.
Gluten
Yeah.
exposure is 10 to 55 0.
50.
It's
Got it.
usually 50 is what we think of, but as small as 10 for some highly sensitive people can cause a reaction, but usually 50. And if you thought about it, 50 milligrams of gluten would be, so it would be about eating 80, I think it's 83 to 87 servings of a food that has 20 parts per million of gluten or less.
Yeah. It's like mind blowing to think about those numbers, right? All right. So someone's saying many of my celiac type 1 diabetes patients are very selective eaters. For younger kids, we send them to the feeding team, but for older kids, what strategies have worked for your team?
Yes. So those patients are hard. I think that again, it's kind of individualized. I really try to make a list of what their likes and dislikes are, and come up with just some strategies for proteins and fats, lower sugar carbohydrates that are gluten-free for them, and working on gradual changes. Again, timing of insulin is important for them if they're gonna have these higher glycemic restrictive diets. And I think it's very important to do a nutrient analysis with those patients so that we're making sure that they're meeting their micronutrient intakes, because gluten-free foods are not as fortified to begin with, and if they're on a restrictive eating pattern, then they really might not be meeting their needs. And we've seen a number of cases of scurvy at children's just from kids that are not eating their fruits and not having enough vitamin C. And it's not always obvious. It's not always like bleeding gums that they present with. It can be more that just like generalized joint pain, and because vitamin C has to do with collagen synthesis. So yeah, so I think it's really important to do a nutrient analysis, and that's why a chronometer is great. Like if you can, for all my new patients, my first initial visit, I do that. They can see like what their holes are in their diet, get a vitamin in, that has the nutrients that they need, and that can really help.
Yeah. Oh, we still have so many. We're going to try to get to all of these. All right. So someone's asking, and I think we just need a little clarification. How much gluten is equivalent to 1 carb? Will this be dependent on the type of flour used to impact glycemic index? So I think we're more talking about the ratio, how you select a flour and how that affects glycemic index,
Still not exactly sure how to answer that. So in terms of 1 carb.
Yeah, why don't we just, if that person could maybe rephrase the question, I think Sharon, maybe just quickly give us some lower GI flours that might be helpful. You said almond flour before.
Yeah, teff is another one. Those nut-based flours, soy is another good one. So
yeah. Do you ever recommend a specific continuous glucose monitor over another?
I mean, most of our patients, pretty much almost all of my patients have the Dexcom G6. A few have the Freestyle Libre, but most have the Dexcom G6.
Okay. This is kind of a little nuanced question to one we answered earlier. So do you target specific carb goals at each meal within that structure of 40 to 45%? Or do you do it over the day?
So, we always give like kind of like a range of carb goals for meals. So somewhere, it could be like if you're figuring out like what their total calorie goal is for the day, just based on EERs or whatever, and then you take 40 to 45% of that, you can kind of come up with a total carbohydrate amount during the day, and then you can kind of split it up between meals and snacks. But in general, it's going to be somewhere between 30 and 60. For a bigger child or older child, it might be 75 per meal, and then 0 to 30 for snacks. But again, that's like going to be not always that, if they have a higher carbohydrate pasta meal with gluten-free bread, then they're going to go over their 75 if they're a teenager, but we really try to bring the balance back, like, so that, more of their meals are in that balance.
Yeah. Okay, this one, I think I would love for you to, after I ask this question, to talk about your food pantry efforts. But someone's asking lower cost gluten-free breads that are lower glycemic load, or just general resources for how to navigate a low cost diet for this dual diagnosis. I think you're definitely the right person to get this question.
Yeah, I actually just worked with a family yesterday on this. I mean, the mom is so good. So really, when you think about low cost gluten-free diet, using those naturally gluten-free foods is going to be really low budget, so using potatoes, corn, rice, and then like corn tortillas is another thing that's going to be really easy to get and gluten-free, for the grain part, and then adding in eggs and chicken and, your nuts and seeds and protein sources, fruits and vegetables. That makes a very healthy gluten-free diet with really like minimally processed foods. And also you can access those foods through like food pantries a lot of times, even if you don't need to get the gluten-free foods. At Boston Children's, we've got the Family Food Connections pantry that, luckily because of our grants, we have these gluten-free foods that are available to our families, and it really gives them a lot more variety of different gluten-free foods that are breads and grains and crackers and cookies and stuff like that. But if you had to go really low budget, you could do it without that, just by using naturally gluten-free foods.
Yeah, and just on that note too, I don't know where you're located, but if you're not in Boston, the National Celiac Association does have a lot of resources for pantries that specifically stock gluten-free foods. So that's a good place to look too if you're not in the Boston area. But I totally agree, the naturally gluten-free foods are probably much easier in that scenario. Okay, let's see. We just have two more, Sharon. We're almost there. So just quickly, if you would comment on oats, someone's commenting that some oats are contaminated and you need to pay attention to the brand. So can you give your statement on the oats situation? I know it's crazy right now.
Yeah. I mean, so, we know that when you have celiac disease, gluten-free oats are necessary. You have to have gluten-free oats. Regular oats are not okay on a gluten-free diet. And that means that they are, when it's listed on the packaging, gluten-free, they're guaranteeing or testing that product to be less than 20 parts per million. Oats can be prepared in two ways to be gluten-free. The manufacturer can be following a purity protocol process where they're starting with gluten-free seeds, gluten-free dirt, gluten-free manufacturing machinery. From start to finish, it's gluten-free. Whereas the other alternative is mechanical optical sorting, where you've got more of like a cleaning process where the oats might not be gluten-free, but then they do this testing, and it's really coming down to quality control to make sure that the product is gluten-free and less than 20 parts per million. And so at Boston Children's, we're recommending that both ways are fine to use products for a patient with celiac disease. So you're not always going to know what that product is, how that product was manufactured by looking at the label. It's not going to say purity protocol or mechanical optical sorting on the packaging. But if it says gluten-free, in any way or form, gluten-free, free of gluten, anything, then that is what we would say would be okay.
Great. And last one, very fitting for today. Any tips for clients partaking in fasting for Ramadan?
Yeah, so that's really where you're going to be working with your endocrine provider to make sure that that you're adjusting your insulin and adjusting most likely your basal insulin during that fasting period, so that you're not going low. And then yeah,
Yeah.
it's really insulin focused.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These were all great questions. I think we got to everything. So again, everyone, I will be emailing your certificates tomorrow with the resources that Sharon provided, and then we will have an access. I'll be sending in the next few days a recording, a link to the recording of the session. We will not be sharing the slides, but you'll be able to watch the recording anytime you want on the Dr. Shar Institute website. So thank you, Sharon. This is great. And I learned so much, and I'm sure everyone else did too. We had tons of questions. So thank you.
Thank you.